Comptroller General, I want to switch topics to another issue that this committee has devoted a great deal of attention to that can hurt the retirement security of women as well as men, and that is senior scams and fraud. Over the past 7 years, this committee has held 25 different hearings examining scams that are targeting our nation's seniors. And these scams not only exact an emotional toll on the victims and their families, but they also threaten their retirement security. We've heard from seniors in Maine and across the country who have lost their hard-earned savings to a scam. We have a toll-free fraud hotline that people can call, and we will try to assist them. We issue a fraud book every year to try to alert seniors to the most frequent kinds of frauds and scams. But what we've found is these con artists, these outright criminals, are infinitely creative in the kinds of scams that they come up with. An example is Philip Hatch from Portland, Maine, who testified before this committee about losing $8,000 of his retirement savings to a scammer who was impersonating an IRS agent. The most frequent scam that we're hearing about now involves Social Security, and that has been the #1 scam that we're seeing right now, where a senior will be tricked into giving out his or her Social Security number. And of course, that's often the keys to the kingdom. So, Comptroller General, does GAO have any recommendations for additional steps that the federal government can take to prevent seniors from losing their hard-earned retirement savings to these ruthless criminals?
Yes, there's some legislation that's working its way through the Congress I think would be very helpful. The Stopping Senior Scams Act that was, I think, co-sponsored by Senator Casey. It's passed the Senate unanimously. Hopefully there's a bill being introduced in the House, a companion bill. So I think that legislation would be very helpful. It would set up an advisory committee made up of the key federal entities that are involved in this effort. So it would ensure better coordination across the federal government, which I think is essential. We find that typically that's one of the most pressing problems now across government, the most complex, involve multiple agencies to work together to deal with this. And the government's not all that great all the time at having that kind of cooperation and coordination. This would help in that area. There's also a piece of legislation that's been introduced about preventing emergency scams involving seniors during the pandemic, which I think would be good. What I've seen over my career, which is quite lengthy, as you mentioned, is that when there's a natural disaster, when there's an emergency, during the pandemic, people have high anxiety, they're concerned, they're very vulnerable. This is when these people ramp up their activities to try to take advantage of this. You know, before I took my job as Comptroller General, I had a much higher opinion of human nature than I do now. But they seem to be ever creative, ever, evolving their schemes to prey, and the elderly are among the most vulnerable people in this area. And so we've also have some recommendations to the Justice Department. They have a number of activities underway to improve their efforts, to set better goals that can be measured, to assess how well they're doing in helping states where they provide grants to areas as well. And I think that those type of things are essential. We're also doing work at your request now, looking at HHS and their collection, where they're collecting enough information about what's going on to be able to better target federal government's efforts and the full extent of elder exploitation, financial exploitation. And I don't want to miss this opportunity to also commend the committee for your efforts in this area. I think the hotline, the fraud book that you put out is essential and very thoughtfully approached and helpful.
Thank you. And I want to follow up by highlighting two new scams that are directly related to the COVID-19 pandemic, because as you've just pointed out, these criminals will take advantage of any tragedy, any new development, any chaos that occurs, any problems that are facing our country. One is seniors are being called and told that they have to pay upfront for a COVID test, when in fact, those tests, the cost of which we've appropriated billions of dollars, are, in the vast majority of cases, completely free. Second, they have been told that they have to pay now for a vaccine that isn't even on the market yet, but in order to ensure that they will get the vaccine. And third, there are criminals who are exploiting the sympathies that seniors have for families that are struck by COVID-19 and are economically struggling, and trying to get them to contribute to a fund that will help a family, when in fact, it's never going to that family. It's just lining the pockets of these criminals. I'm very glad you mentioned the Justice Department efforts. I will take credit for causing them to name an elder abuse attorney in every U.S. attorney office in the United States. When my former colleague Jeff Sessions was named Attorney General, this was an issue that I talked to him about and urged him to pursue, and he did indeed do just that. So now we have a focal point in the U.S. Attorney's Office, so that no longer are what in the eyes of law enforcement may be viewed as small dollar frauds, but are devastating to the senior who is ripped off, ignored. They now are being pursued in U.S. attorneys' offices all across the country. And I think that is big progress.